So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Sheffield CCG's 2021 annual public meeting. In order to keep everybody safe, so in order to keep members of the public safe and to keep our staff safe, this year we've opted to have a virtual meeting and we'll be doing our session online. We have members of our governing body joining us this afternoon, along with some of our executive directors and some of our clinical directors from across Sheffield CCG. What we will do in today's video is we're going to introduce some of the key areas of activity the CCG has undertaken over the last 12 months. We'll hear some highlights of some projects, and we will also have an overview of our financial accounts. The past year has been another unprecedented year and indeed very challenging, not just for the CCG, but for the wider NHS and indeed our communities here in Sheffield. As we continue to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic, it's important for us to reflect that that has touched us all in the health service and indeed has touched us all within our communities and our workplaces in the city, but indeed across the world. COVID's impacted the way in which we work, it's impacted the way in which we relate to one another, and it's impacted the way in which we can go and how we communicate. It's also had a wider impact on families, friends, relationships, and communities, as well as the way in which we as patients and health professionals engage with health and care services. The pandemic has reshaped the way in which we work, and it has redefined some of the priorities that we must focus on. Initially, our focus has been on responding and managing the crisis as it unfolded, and then on directly supporting the delivery of frontline services through volunteering in GP practices and other services across the city, and indeed the sterling efforts of our staff here in Sheffield in delivering the COVID-19 vaccination programme. Over the past year, things have been rather uncertain and at times have been very difficult for the staff working in our health and care organisations. And in particular, at the beginning of the pandemic, we saw some very real pressures on our hospital services. But we are now seeing increased pressures and increased difficulties in other parts of our health and care system, in particular our GP practices and also our mental health services. But during this uncertain and difficult time, I think it is worth pointing out that our GPs, our mental health staff and our hospital colleagues have come together in an extraordinary way and in extraordinary circumstances to help protect our city's most vulnerable. And this work extends beyond the work that our healthcare workers have undertaken, and actually extends into some of the staff who work out in communities directly supporting patients with their social needs, some of our care home staff, and indeed many of the volunteers who responded rapidly in Sheffield to ensure that people are able to stay at home and remain safe. So we want to publicly acknowledge the hard work that our health and care workers and our volunteers and our citizens across Sheffield have put in over the last 12 months, and to thank each and every one of you for the positive impact that you've made over the past year. As a CCG, we are particularly proud of everybody's resilience in the face of uncertainty and how you've collectively supported one another. We're now going to take some time to show you a short video of some of the members of staff from Sheffield CCG talking about their important projects and achievements over the past 12 months.
people have been asked to come and talk about something that they're really proud of that they did last year. So it's a little snippet. Hopefully it's an insight for you into some of the work that's gone on. It can only be a snapshot. And we've grouped it around the 4 themes of the annual report. So the first theme is integration, and that's all about how we're bringing all the different parts of health and care together around patients to meet their needs and really trying to orchestrate that. So our first example is from Lisa Renshaw, who's going to talk about a very interesting piece of work that she did that had a national profile. Thank you, Lisa.
Hi everybody. Prior to COVID in Sheffield, the Ccg Infection Prevention and Control team worked to build relationships with colleagues in Sheffield City Council, Public Health England and within the Ccg. We agreed the need for a robust approach to infection prevention and control in care homes. In 2019, while continuing to prioritise the importance of IPC and the need to further support improvements, I put a proposal to the Infection Prevention Society, which is a national society for a special interest group for care homes. This was accepted and the group now has over 200 members. It was during my role as coordinator for this group that I co-authored the national training package with Professor Jenny Wilson. She's now the president of the IPS. This was a valuable resource for care homes on a national level and was very well received. I also provided input into a Kovid training package with colleagues in NHSE and wrote a further 2 training packages which are now being delivered to care homes on a local level by colleagues in Sheffield City Council. Although I'm proud of my achievements with the IPS, my greatest achievement is my role within the Ccg IPC team. During COVID, myself and Nicky Littlewood have found the determination and resilience to work through the exceptional circumstances which have probably been the most challenging in our careers. It has strengthened us as a team and made us more determined to continue in our work in raising the profile of IPC in Sheffield. COVID has further highlighted the need to support care homes and GP practices with their IPC requirements. We've learned there's still a lot more work to be done. Our role in itself is challenging and we have to work hard to build relationships and deal with conflict as our advice is not always well received. Everything we do is for the benefit of the resident and patient. And I always think how I would like to be cared for. As a team, we always do the right thing, which is not necessarily the easiest, but that's because that's what nurses do. I'm proud to be a nurse, and I always keep the resident and the patient at the heart of everything I do. The day I stop caring is the day I will stop nursing. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa, for sharing that. And I can see a round of applause coming from our governing body. So thank you, Lisa. That was a really, really heartfelt statement. And we are a clinical commissioning group, and that really underlined to me the importance of that clinical drive from that whole broad range of clinicians that work with us in Sheffield CCG. So thank you very much for that. Does anybody have any comments or questions they wish to share with Lisa before we go back to Jane? Judy, please.
You brought tears to my eyes, Lisa. That's exactly what we're all about. That was so brilliant how you put it across, and bringing that to life, what you've all been able to do, and not shying away from the conflict and, like you described, persevering. Really, really well done. Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further comments or questions? No, thank you so much, Lisa. I'll hand back over to Jane, please.
Thank you. I just wanted to briefly mention 2 other examples of integrated care. One has been led by the mental health team, and particularly James Sutherland, but not exclusively. And that's our new service to help people with more complex mental health needs. And it's one of 12 national pilot sites. And it helps people with things like panic disorder and trauma, and it's delivered in primary care, and it involves specialists from the voluntary sector. So it's a more specialist service than we had before, and it's more local to where people are living. So it's very exciting. It's been a lot of work. The other piece of work I wanted to mention was the work that we've done in partnership with the local authority, voluntary sector, police and fire around supporting homeless people and rough sleepers during the COVID pandemic, and a wraparound approach to try and find people, help them into accommodation, help them into healthcare, and then latterly making sure that they got access to their COVID vaccine. So it's been a really huge piece of work. Alistair described it as quite humbling, actually. So I just wanted to mention that as another example of things that we've done that have been different this year. The next theme in our annual report is actually how we've responded to COVID and its impact on our population and its impact on our services. And Sapphire and Joe are going to talk about a really important project that they were involved in. Thank you.
Thanks, Jane. I'm going to kick off and then I'll hand over to Joe. So for anybody that doesn't know me, I'm Sapphire Johnson. My day job is normally as the head of commissioning for children, young people and maternity. But last year I was redeployed into setting up the community swabbing service, which originally started off as testing service for primary care. And then very quickly we expanded that up to testing for pharmacy, dentistry, optometry, voluntary sector, social care, and eventually ended up testing care home residents and workers as well. And we managed to set that up really quickly. So from within a week of establishing the project team, we were doing our first tests. We were 10 days ahead of the national service in doing that. Right from the very beginning, we were able to get things like test results back onto people's medical records, which is something that it took the national team months to do. Being so kind of ahead of the curve meant that we could share that learning with other parts of the system and other parts of the country. So we were giving advice every day to the regional testing cell about how to set up their testing service and their guidance and things like that. And our peripatetic swabbing team who went out testing in the care homes, that was actually used as an example of good practice in the DHSD guidance. So we're really proud of how quickly we managed to set that up. And as a rough estimate, we think that we cut the amount of time frontline workers had to spend self-isolating by around 4,200 days, which we think is quite impressive. And the only way we were able to do that is because of everybody's commitment and enthusiasm and determination to make it happen. I have always been really proud to work for the NHS, and we all know what makes the NHS is its people. And I was just constantly amazed and inspired and in awe of all the people that helped to make that service happen. Nothing was ever too much trouble. Nobody ever said no. Everybody just came together to make it happen. And when everything got difficult or we came up against a problem, we all got together and came up with a solution to it. Nothing was ever too big an issue. We just got on with it. So I'm going to hand you over to Joe, who's one of the nurses that worked in the service, to tell you a little bit more about how it worked day to day.
Thank you, Sapphire. And for those that don't know me, my name's Jo Watson. I've worked for the NHS, unfortunately, again, about 35, 36 years. So, yeah, I've been around a little while. With the service for the swabbing, it was mainly led by the primary care development nurses, but it was a multi-organisational team approach to everything. And the things that I found that I was really proud of from the service was how successful we were at working across organisational boundaries. We came together as a whole team, and a real whole team, which was very different from what I've experienced in the past. when I've tried to do things across organisations, there's always been a lot of difficulty around roles and things. It was a totally different attitude. It worked very quickly. We built relationships and partnerships right across the multidisciplinary team and multidisciplinary organisations. We managed to develop this integrated and a real hybrid way of working across the board. For me, I think the members of the team actually had ownership of the service rather than buy-in. It was a real difference, and it provided a culture of sort of naturally taking responsibility, and members were more engaged. There was more commitment, and they were given opportunities to be directly involved in developing the service, right from people swabbing right through to people leading the service altogether. We adapted a very open yes we can philosophy, and we're really a positive attitude that increased flexibility and adaptability, so we were able to find solutions, as Sapphire said, really quickly, with very much using a team approach, especially if there was any negativity or any difficulties that came around. And thinking about conflict, actually there was very little conflict that we experienced within the team because of that attitude. We quickly developed trust within the team. Everything was very open and honest. We were really sharing information, sharing solutions, issues, and we actually developed a culture where everyone was valued and everybody's contribution was vital to what we were actually putting together, and that helped to build team resilience. The service was delivered at speed, but we remained clinically safe, and we were very much learning together. Nobody had heard of PCR testing. We didn't know what it was. We'd never heard of anything. So it was we were all on a real big learning curve, but that was, again, all of us were in the same boat. Team members felt assured. They embraced the opportunities that were given to them. Feedback from the team has been that they felt proud and had a real purpose in such strange times, and they particularly enjoyed working with new people and using that collaborative way of working, and that actually enhanced what they got out of putting the service together. And feedback from the service users was exceedingly positive. Comments like the fears were erased by the professionalism of the staff, and the overall experience was rated as good or very good, with high levels of satisfaction. And leading on from all this is that we have still got those relationships ongoing that we've done across the different organisations. And I know myself, we've used those relationships in other work that we've done since, in other projects, in service development for the benefit of the people of Sheffield. And on a very personal note, I mean, it was an absolute pleasure to be involved and to work with such a great team of professionals to deliver such a successful service in a very little time, in that real period of flux and change. And it shows that with a belief and the right culture, you can actually achieve a win-win for all. Thank you.
So thank you, Joanne and Sapphire. I know we'd kind of moved on to the next theme, which was talking about COVID response. But my notes that I've been scribbling down here almost takes us back to the first theme, Jane, which is integration. This was integration between organisations, integration between professional groups. And Sapphire, I'm astounded at the number of days of time that had saved to get healthcare workers back looking after people with COVID. I've not come across that number before, but it is astounding, and it's a real testament to the service. And then just to hear the people who have used the service have had positive experiences, really kind of it spells quality of service, and I think that's something we should rightly be proud of. So I can see a hand's gone up by Lee Sorsby. Lee, do you want to come in, please?
Yes, thank you. Congratulations to both of you, just to a brilliant presentation, really. I think at a time when everybody is feeling that life is a bit tough at the moment, this is so refreshing. And just thinking about those number of days that you quoted, Sapphire, I think you shouldn't just think that you've saved days at work. That's probably saved lives as well. And I think that's really important. And what I heard from both of you, but particularly, well, actually both of you, is that there was lots of cross-organisational working. There were no barriers. There was a sense of ownership. There was shared goals. Everyone felt included and valued from whatever stage of the process they were at. No one said no. There was a can-do attitude. And it's just music to our ears, this, isn't it? And I just feel, I feel overwhelmed with gratitude to be a tiny part of this system that has worked so well together. But also I feel saddened that it's taken a pandemic to make this happen. And I suppose, I don't want to dampen, the joy and the glow that we're feeling from this, but actually, there's a really important point about very, very quick learning about how that happened. What were the levers that enabled that to happen apart from a global pandemic, and to harness that positivity and that sense of agency and ownership, because all the other things that we face in the NHS are just as deadly and just as threatening, but perhaps not as immediate and obvious as a pandemic. And, to see what is possible and what can be achieved, it would be tragic if we lost what we've learned from that. So that would just be my plea to all of us, really, as a system, is to quickly harness what enabled that to happen, and try and take that forward as we're facing this new emerging landscape in front of us.
Thank you, Lee. Alan Windle, please.
Sorry, I moved pictures. I was on mute in there, Chair. I moved to the other side of the screen. It would be amiss of me to say at this point, one section that isn't in the annual report that links back to the primary care development nurses, but recognising the work in an integrated way, is that they received a national award for their work throughout the past 12 months. And we couldn't squeeze it in because it was a secret to them to begin with. And we will sing about it for the next 12 months. And so, yeah, thank you, Sapphire, for that leadership and support. And yet again, Joanne, back to the team and everybody, really well done, really, really well done, and so proud. Proud that you work in my team. You don't.
I know. Thank you, Alan.
Really well done. Really well done.
Yeah, thank you. Obviously, the primary care development nurses were really proud of what they've achieved from there, but we're still very much around the work that we did within swabbing was a much wider team than just us. It was huge, and it was just a pleasure.
Okay, thank you. I'll hand back over to Jane for theme number 3.
Well, we're still on theme number 2, but we're taking a different turn now, because I'm going to invite my colleagues from the community engagement and participation team, Helen and Richard, to talk about the really important work they've been doing, hearing people's voices and experiences during the last year. Thank you.
Thanks, Jane. Yeah, for anybody who doesn't know, I'm Richard Kennedy. I'm one of the engagement managers, and my colleague Helen will be joining me to tell you a couple of things. So since the CCG was formed, the engagement team have been continually improving how we discharge our statutory duties around involvement, as well as building relationships with our communities. And last year we were proud to be recognised by NHS England as being outstanding in our patient and community engagement, which has been a journey, kind of climbing up that ladder to be recognised as such. And then for the last 14 months, they have been devastating for a lot of our communities, but it has provided us with an opportunity to hear, to assist, to invest in, to build relationships and trust within those communities. And we're going to speak to you about 3 pieces of work that we're particularly proud of for doing those things.
Hi everyone, so I'm Helen Mulholland. I'm the other half of Richard and Helen. And the first thing I wanted to talk to you about was the Community Insights log. So if we think back to March last year, we were aware that what we were hearing from community leaders and from different people across the city was different. And there was huge inequalities in terms of how different people were experiencing the pandemic, both in terms of COVID itself, but also in terms of the lockdown and the implications of lockdown for families and for individuals. And we started to gather that insight, that lived experience really early on, so at the beginning of March, at the end of March last year. And to date, we've gathered around 800 pieces of individual information about lived experience in this brilliant city. And that has given us enormous insight into how people have experienced it. It's kind of a piece of social history. Last year, we were able to feed that information into our teams here, and that was a positive experience. We were also able to feed that information into our rapid health impact assessments that were obviously led by our public health team. We fed it into SHAR and information that they've been developing and working on behalf of the Health and Wellbeing Board, and it's been shared widely across our ACP partners. So as those 800 pieces of insight, as a piece of kind of social history, I think that we will look back on that and we will continue to look into that as we continue with our commissioning intentions moving forward as a city and much wider. Then if I think about the end of last year, kind of the autumn time, and we were all very concerned about flu and about COVID and the mix there and that toxic mix. And so what we wanted to do was work more closely with our community partners in our voluntary community and faith sector organisations. We were doing a lot of work with public health at the time, and we had a conversation with lovely Jackie, and we said, could we have a little bit of money, please, to invest in these community organisations? She said yes, very kindly, and we worked with 10 organisations, including organisations like SACMA, like Dana Wellbeing, like Unity Gym, some really tiny organisations in the city. And we asked those 10 organisations, they were all given £1,000 each, to develop a plan, to co-produce a plan for how they could talk to local people about having their flu vaccine. And that it was done through a whole variety of different ways, whether it was food banks, whether it was on community radio. It was done in culturally appropriate ways by our community leaders who know our communities best. And so having those in-depth conversations, often on a one-to-one basis, was the difference between people choosing to have their flu vaccine or not have their flu vaccine. And we were able to use that and the plans that those organisations developed to then learn, knowing that the COVID vaccine was coming just a couple of months later. So that kind of pilot made an enormous difference in terms of encouraging people to have the vaccine, but the ways that we were working in partnership across the city. I'm going to hand over to Richard now, just talk a little bit about the COVID vaccine stuff.
Yeah, so once the COVID vaccination programme was announced back in December of last year, encouraging the people of Sheffield to take up that offer of the vaccine became one of our key priorities. And national and local insight was telling us that there were some communities that were hesitant about the vaccine, and that there were some others that may face barriers to actually getting the vaccine, even if they wanted to. So, and there was a lot of concern that the impact that this would have on health inequalities across Sheffield. So in response, we planned and delivered a community engagement project, which is ongoing at the moment. We've invested £235,000 into 26 local community organisations. And these community organisations have been picked because of their long-standing and trusted links with the communities that we identified as being less likely to take up the offer of the COVID vaccine. And because of the work that we've done with them previously, and we knew how trusted they are within their communities and how much they would bring to this project. So through the project, we wanted to engage people in ways that suited them, sharing key messages to build confidence of the vaccine, overcome barriers and mistrust, and encourage the uptake of the vaccine. We also wanted to gain insights into the reasons of why people were hesitant, why they might be facing barriers, so we can shape dynamically, flexibly as we go along in our rollout of the vaccine programme. And it's enabled us to directly work with these organisations, utilising the skills and knowledge within these communities to reach all of their communities. It's all been planned and delivered by the organisations themselves. When we talk about co-production, this is almost a devolved way of working. You know, we've kind of set a shared ideals and aims of wanting to engage and gain insight, but how that's delivered, we have completely trusted these organisations to go about and choose and deliver that, which I think is essential to the success of it. And based on the latest national information that we have, it's having a significant impact. So Sheffield has the highest uptake of the vaccine compared to the 9 core UK cities outside of London. So we hope that this is playing a significant part within that. And obviously it goes with all of the rest of the work that everybody's putting into that. So this is saving lives ultimately, and it's great to hear. But even more than that are the individual stories that Helen and I hear on a daily basis from these organisations. They're so heartwarming, and they're of stories of these community organisations going above and beyond to support the people within their communities. And it starts from reading their vaccination letters for people whose English isn't their first language, to making their appointments, to taking them to their appointment, to have their vaccinations, holding their hands whilst they're having the vaccinations, and even shopping for them if they're feeling unwell after having it. And this experience that these communities are having now will determine how they interact with health services in the future. So it's not just having an impact at the moment for COVID. Hopefully the building of this trust within communities, but the lasting legacy of the CCG as well, and of health services in Sheffield will hopefully have a longer lasting legacy as well.
And just finally, just to say, it is about us as an organisation listening and hearing to communities and to individuals. And the more that our decision making is rooted in our communities, the better decisions that we will make. So the other thing to just say is about the sustainability of the voluntary community and faith sector. Without them, we would never have been able to do this work. It's about the trusted relationships that they have with communities. And so this work has all been delivered in a culturally appropriate, with community languages, in ways and means that have meant that people have been able to engage on an individual basis and have a genuine dialogue, and then that's changed behaviour. And so that's why really we're super proud of this work, but we're even more proud of the VCF sector in this city.
Thank you both. Really heartwarming stories again. And I am taking some notes here, and I do hope everyone will stay together, because I think there's I can see some really strong themes emerging here. But I can see we've already got some people eager to feedback or to ask some questions. So I'm going to bring Chris in, please.
Hi, Helen and Richard. Wow, that was fantastic, and I'm privileged to be able to see some of the insights fairly early on and hear those stories. And they influence such a lot of the work, and which you can see in practice. I think a lot of that was about some of the things that you recognise about the trust, about listening, but then taking some action. So you put into place some of the things where there was barriers and people could see that. So that's affected that all round, from COVID and testing, vaccination, but also that mutual support. And where we've had really good relationships with primary care and voluntary sector, not where we've had those in most places in Sheffield, you've seen such a big positive input pact, and the volunteers that have worked in partnership with primary care. So I want to congratulate you on the award, and also recognise that this has been part of our whole structure with Speak and where we want to go in the future, because, as you were saying, it's the best way to commission services. And I hope that we'll carry this on, this culture of working into the next structure. So I know there's a lot in there, but it's such dear to my heart, this area of work. So thanks very much.
Thanks, Chris. Mark Gamsu, please.
Yeah, thanks, Terry. as everyone knows, I mean, as the chair of Speak, it's been fantastic working with the team and indeed with the other members on the committee. We've still got a little while to go, so I'm still looking forward to the next few months. But I just want to say that I think, listening to, there's been a bit of a story with Hall. I mean, obviously I know more about the work that Rich and Helen have been doing, but listening to the earlier presentations as well, the key bit here is about relationships and trust and understanding that people have, through Joanne, Sapphire and others who've spoken, with organisations that exist in the city. And I'm not convinced at the moment that there's an understanding across some of the other potential players in the city that is understood sufficiently. I think people sort of acknowledge it in principle, but are not completely clear about what that means, because I think the CCG has led, and you would expect it to, on building those trusted relationships, strategic relationships with a range of organisations. And I think just because of where particularly the other NHS organisations in the city sit and how they have been traditionally performance managed and everything else, they haven't got that same depth that we have developed. I know that Leslie and Terry, who are key to this, are aware of the importance of ensuring that we build on what we already have. I think, I would just say that as long as we continue to be here, we need to keep an eye on what that actually means. And that doesn't mean I don't trust them to at all.
Thank you, Mark. Any further comments to come through? Any further reflections? Trish Edney, please.
Thank you. I mean, obviously, stirring work and well done, and the whole response to COVID has been fantastic. But I just query and put in a note of caution. You've had this wonderful setup to help with communities. What lessons have you learnt? These letters going out for vaccinations and appointments and other things to patients are computer driven. You've got a wonderful computer system now that tells you where your patients are, what they're doing, etc. You should be able to surely send them out a letter in the right language now and not have to have community organisations to help translate them. Yes, obviously there are going to be reading problems for patients and communication problems, but it's a lesson to learn from the activities that you've had to do already.
Okay, thank you, Trish. Something for us to feed back to our digital leads across CCGs and indeed across the country. I think it's a valid point that you can go onto a website and get that in multiple languages. I think it's something we need to consider in health. So again, Helen and Richard, thank you both for those stories. And whilst we're on vaccination, I think it's just another testament really to our membership. So to our GPs in our city that were absolutely fundamental in delivering our biggest ever flu vaccination campaign. And obviously the COVID vaccination campaign has been the biggest vaccination campaign of anything ever. And we know that 75% of those vaccines have been delivered through primary care, who are under immense pressure, absolutely busting a gut. So I think, the combination of that and that great engagement has made an absolutely huge difference to those populations, particularly those vulnerable populations. So I'm going to hand back over to Jane, please.
Yes, I didn't want to leave COVID without mentioning the team at the CCG who've worked on vaccination, Alan's team, Richard and Karen and Joy, and all of the work that's been done by locality managers and practice managers and GPs. Sitting as I do, looking at the COVID inbox every day, seeing the letters that come out saying, don't do it like that, do it like this. I think the phrase turn on the sixpence really comes into play. People have been so responsive. It's been amazing. And also wanted to mention some unsung heroes who our GP members will know about, who are our IT team. At the beginning of all this, we're just delivering laptops, headsets, sorting out software so that practices could start to work remotely and do online triage. And that was a superhuman effort. People were delivering equipment all over the city. So that was fantastic as well. So moving more to the CCG as an organisation and thinking about ourselves, our next theme is about cultural change and developing our staff and developing our culture. And I'd like to introduce my colleagues Helen Pinchbeck and Daniil Graham, who are going to give us an insight into some of the work that they've been doing. Thank you.
Thanks, Jane. So I'm Helen Pinchbeck, the OD and Learning and Development Business Partner for the South Yorkshire and Bassett Law CCGs. So as you know, Covid took over most of last year and this year too. And as a CCG, we've adapted really well to working in remote ways. So as Jane mentioned, the IT team have been brilliant. So all those who needed a laptop have one. And we now have a Covid secure office, which is no mean feat. So wellbeing has been at the heart of everything we do and has been pushed into our conscious when making decisions and innovating ideas. We very quickly learned the functions of Zoom and MS Teams, even if we'd not heard of them before COVID, and coming up with some creative ways of staying connected with each other and maintaining morale in such challenging times. Our Onwards and Upwards Cultural Change programme embraced virtual sessions and supported our new ways of working. So initially it was externally delivered. We now have 5 CCGs trained staff who are delivering the 2-day programme. And they have also devised bite-sized sessions using the tools and techniques from the programme to support staff in what we're calling the Beating the COVID Blues 45-minute accessible sessions. So these include topics such as time management and beating bad habits. So as autumn approached in 2020, we launched our Winter Wellness campaign. So our weekly roundup emails and intranet pages were filling up with ideas and support for staff's physical, mental, financial and parental wellbeing. We've had photo competitions and encouraged staff to share tips on how to look after your mental health through a Jamboard to create a community of practice. And our Pilates and yoga sessions, formerly face-to-face, went online and we signed up to the hashtag Doing Our Bit platform, which are professional trainers giving back to the NHS with online recorded sessions on high and low impact, family fun, stretches, hydration and lots more. So check it out if you haven't done so already. Our Time to Talk Ficas have been so popular. Staff have asked for them on a monthly basis. So it's a really great way to boost the start of your day and see people outside of your day-to-day work bubble. And the COVID learning group was established early on in lockdown 1. So staff across the CCG of all levels, including governing body members, joined up to this listening group, helping to collate staff stories and highlight their COVID journeys. So this group met regularly and was a great leveller as people shared their experiences from all different perspectives. So on a personal level, individual work level, project groups and teams. And this included making recommendations back to the organisation as well, many of which have already been implemented. So the outcome of the COVID learning group work, the feedback received from the staff temperature check survey and a general shift of encouragement of people to speak up and share their ideas and creativity. So for example, at the fortnightly online staff briefings has and will continue to change the way we work forever for the better. So staff have been involved in developing and reviewing HR policies, such as the email, team working and video conferencing policy and the new home working policy as well. And as and when all COVID restrictions have been lifted, the CCG is taking a refreshing approach of allowing a 3-month period of staff to readjust to life back into the office. So they can trial blending working so they can make an informed decision about how they want to work in the future on an individual, team and organisational basis. So we've saved a lot of money and reduced our carbon footprint by embracing new technology and reducing travel and printing. And there are many other newfound benefits that will stay and are being incorporated into new established work streams, such as the 722 and the new normal. We had to be adaptive to work and home situations, from flexible working to incorporate homeschooling and caring for others into our working day, to providing support to our staff on eventualities they may face. So our mental health first aiders continue to meet regularly and discuss current topics of contact and support available, plus arranging sessions on musculoskeletal advice with physios, to psychological first aid and anxiety on coming out of lockdown with our IAPT colleagues. We've taken our internal training online. So for example, our management and leadership course, HR courses such as recruitment and selection and risk management. We've also ensured sensitive topics are not forgotten about too. So for example, bullying, harassment prevention, and talking about suicide. And we've been approached to present at the ICS Roadshow for suicide prevention to share our work on this. Our coaching offer has remained and is available for all staff through our CCG qualified coaches. So they have regular supervision and CPD, but there's also the Leadership Academy national offer of coaches for all staff across the NHS as well. Our wellbeing services, such as the Employee Assistance Programme and being signed up as a mindful employer, provides confidential advice and signposting free for all staff. So as you can see, there's a lot of great work happened and happening, and with so many staff being key to all of this being successful, far too many to mention. But we're not stopping there. We will strive to continue to support and help improve wellbeing culture of the CCG. After all, this directly impacts on the health and wellbeing of the Sheffield community, of which most of us are part of. We've got upcoming projects we are working on, such as raising awareness and support on the menopause. And our full staff survey results will be available next month. And the survey questions were developed by our own staff members, and the feedback from that will help inform our future endeavours. So hopefully I've given you a good flavour of the activity that has happened during the last year. I've certainly enjoyed it, and I'm proud to be part of all the activities that I've mentioned. So I'll hand you over to Daniil now and to talk to you about our equality and inclusion work.
Thank you, Helen. As an organisation, there is a lot to be proud of, in particular the events, celebration, changes we have made from an equality, diversity and inclusive perspective. It has been a journey for the organisation, however, being mindful of the achievements have been over just a short period of months. The impact of COVID-19 and the death of George Floyd shone the spotlight on the inequality faced by minority communities, in particular from a healthcare perspective. The impact of this has empowered colleagues such as myself to reflect on our lived experiences. For me, this was in the form of a poem, which was spoken and shared at staff briefing. Although highly emotive, it was very well received. To get a better understanding of the challenges and difficulties faced, colleagues attended the Black Lives Matter FICA sessions held in July and August 2020. During these virtual webinar sessions, staff had a supportive and confidential environment to share their personal lived experience and the opportunity to have open and honest conversations, looking at issues such as inequalities, racism and microaggressions, to name a few. The Equality, Diversity Inclusion Group was established and is driven by a group of staff who come together on a monthly basis to create solutions to problems and put them in place. It's seen as a new way of working that is truly engaging and makes it real for the entire workforce. With that, there has been an opportunity for a reverse mentoring session with myself and Leslie, and further opportunity to undertake reciprocal mentoring sessions across the CCG. Staff participated in the CCG's first Black History Month celebration in October, looking at the achievements and contributions made by individuals in healthcare, the arts, sports and academia throughout history and the pandemic. We also invited colleagues to use the opportunity to make commitments on a personal and organisational level. with the option to share them anonymously on the Jamboard. One of the favourite events was an audience with special guest speaker Johnny Nelson. In February of this year, we celebrated the progress and diversity of the LGBT+ community to raise awareness of the journey and the progress made, but also the impact and ongoing challenges faced. Staff took part in activities such as designing the Pride flag as part of the Body, Mind and Soul theme. There were also virtual learning lunch sessions which shared personal experience, in particular of people being transgender, but also a reflection of being gay in alternate world. As an EDI group, we have achieved a lot in the past year, which I am very proud of personally and professionally. And we continue to make impactful changes, not only for the workforce, but for the population we serve. As an organisation, we have a lot of fantastic activity around all aspects of cultural development. With that, we are in the process of submitting an entry for the Health Service Journal and the Staff Engagement Award. As Helen noted, the results of the Ccg Staff Survey are due to be received next month, which we'll use to highlight key achievements, but also use as a framework to identify any further improvement. We cannot get complacent as we are mindful that technology and the organisation are evolving at pace. Feedback from the temperature check and other forums have indicated there are still pockets across the CCG where full staff engagement needs to happen. There is much more that we can do individually, but also at an organisational level. On behalf of Helen and myself, thank you for listening.
We are now going to move on to talk about the overview of our finances, and our Director of Finance, Jackie Mills, is unfortunately unable to join us at today's meeting. However, Jackie has helpfully recorded a presentation which goes through the financial accounts for the past 12 months.
Hello, my name is Jackie Mills and I am the Executive Director of Finance and Corporate Services at NHS Sheffield CCG. So I'm pleased to be able to present a summary of the CCG's financial performance in 2021. I will provide an overview of the financial arrangements that we had in place over the course of the year, which were different to those in previous years, mainly as a result of the NHS's response to the COVID-19 pandemic. I'll then go on to outline how we performed in relation to our financial duties, and then finally we'll provide some information on where our funding was spent. So, starting with an overview of the financial arrangements during 2020-21. We started the financial year with confirmation from NHS England that normal financial and contractual framework had been suspended as a result of the pandemic. For the first 6 months, in essence, all NHS organisations were provided with sufficient funding to cover the costs, their actual costs incurred. This included the additional costs associated with responding to the pandemic. For the second half of the year, the financial year, the arrangements were amended, whereby integrated care systems were allocated a fixed sum of money to cover all normal operating expenditure, as well as additional funding to cover COVID expenditure. To note, Sheffield CCG is part of the South Yorkshire and Bassetlaw system. The system funding was then split across all organisations within South Yorkshire and Bassetlaw, and every organisation was then expected to contain its costs within this revised envelope. If I move on to our financial performance in 2020-21, our statutory duty is that we must not spend more than our total resource limit allocated to us by NHS England. I'm pleased to report that we delivered this. We spent just over £1 billion to commission healthcare services for the people of Sheffield, and a £14.5 million on behalf of the South Yorkshire and Bassetlaw ICS, for which Sheffield CCG acts as the host. This was really £3 million less than the final allocation that we received, so we finished the year with a surplus of £3,032,000, of which 32,000 related to the surplus on CCG activities and 3 million related to the surplus on the South Yorkshire and Bassetlaw ICS. We also need to ensure that we do not exceed the allocation provided specifically to cover our running costs. We delivered this, reporting a year-end underspend of 0.6 million. I'm also pleased to report that we received a positive report from our external auditors. We had an unqualified opinion on our accounts and a positive value for money opinion. I just want to pull out some specific information on the additional spend in 2020-21 relating to our response to the COVID pandemic. In addition to supporting the response of our partners in the city, the CCG was responsible for commissioning specific additional services. In the early months, we were responsible for sourcing additional personal protective equipment supplies for our GP practices. We also commissioned additional GP hot hubs to review patients with potential COVID-19 symptoms, thus allowing practices to continue to see their vulnerable patients face-to-face in their own surgeries. And finally, we commissioned a range of additional mental health support services. The CCG was also able to draw down funding based on actual spend to support patients to be discharged from hospital on a timely basis. This ensured that hospital capacity could be protected to support the treatment of the sickest patients. In total, the CCG incurred costs of 22.3 million directly in relation to the CCG's COVID response. Of this, 17.1 million was drawn down from the National Hospital Discharge Programme funding, and a breakdown of where this funding was spent is shown in the table. So where did the money go? Overall, we spent on average £1,660 per person on healthcare for the people of Sheffield. This table provides a summary of where the money was spent. For example, you will see that we spent just under £600 million on acute and community services provided by our main NHS providers, of which just under £500 million was paid to the Sheffield Teaching Hospitals NHS Foundation Trust. You can also see that we spent £154 million on primary and community care, plus a further £102 million on primary care prescribing. This chart represents the same information from the previous table, but allows you to see the proportion of spend in different areas. Whilst acute and community services spend delivered by our main NHS providers accounts for over 58% of our spend, it's also important to note that a significant proportion of spend, equivalent to 42%, remains outside the services provided by our main acute providers in Sheffield. So that's all I wanted to cover. If there are any questions arising from this presentation, please feel free to email these to us. Thank you for listening.
Hopefully you found those two videos useful in understanding some of the activity that we've undertaken as a CCG in the past 12 months. We'd like to move on now to answering a few questions that have been raised with us. So we're going to move on to questions now. The first question that we have is, how has the COVID vaccination programme in Sheffield progressed? And I'd like to bring our Chief Nurse, Alan Windle, in to answer that question for us. So Alan, please could you give us an overview of where we are in terms of the vaccination programme and the work that our services in Sheffield have undertaken in being able to deliver that?
Thank you very much, Chair. I think I'm going to reiterate what you started with a massive thank you to both primary care and other services in Sheffield in their delivery programme of the COVID vaccination. It cannot be underestimated the organisation, the workforce, dedication in delivering such a massive programme in Sheffield. So far, we are the best core city on comparative cities such as Birmingham, Newcastle, in delivering our programme, with the smallest gap of delivery in health inequalities as well across our city. And I think that is something fantastic to celebrate. Work continues currently within relation to what is described as the evergreen offer, because we do have pockets within Sheffield across all age ranges and across all age ranges in Sheffield, within relation to uptake. So if we think about the above 50s group, we've still got a core group that remain unvaccinated, and that is essentially through each of the priority groups for vaccination. But like I say, I think we've done an absolutely fantastic job, and that's testament to primary care really in delivering the huge amount of vaccinations that they are doing, and continue to support that evergreen offer in engaging with communities to continue on the uptake of the vaccine.
So thank you. Thanks, Alan. Yeah, I'm just going to sort of just pick up on one of the points that you made there, which is we've performed very well as a core city, so one of the large cities in the UK. And you mentioned that we've got one of the smallest gaps, so one of the smallest gaps between different communities in their vaccination uptake. And I just wonder whether I may be able to bring in Mark Gamsu, who's our lay member for public and patient engagement, and also to call on Leslie, just to see if we could explore in a little bit more detail some of the ways in which the CCG helped communities pick up their vaccine, and how we engage with communities to achieve that.
Thanks, Chair. I think one of the things that I'd want to touch on and is the engagement team within the CCG worked closely with local voluntary sector anchor organisations, and actually came out with a small funding programme to support this, to ensure that the voices of communities that struggle to be heard continue to be heard all the way through the pandemic. And although as the chair of Speak, it's you might expect me to say this, I think it was a hugely impressive piece of work actually. And at a time when we were losing physical contact with people, actually hearing stories from people with a learning disability, hearing stories from people experiencing a range of different mental health problems, hearing stories from different minority ethnic communities in the city about their concerns with regard to their health, helped us keep in touch during this really difficult time, and helped sensitize some of the work that we were doing, and hopefully informed, I'm sure it did inform some of the planning that we were involved in and the delivery of services.
Thank you, Mark. I would just wonder at that point, just before I bring Leslie in, picking up on that important point there, Mark, we often talk about inequalities in healthcare as being something that's geographical. You know, we have communities in different parts of the city, but we do know that inequalities can exist across different communities. And one of those inequalities that's really important, and perhaps one of the biggest health inequalities we see, is for people with learning disabilities. And I just wonder if I could bring in Steve Thomas, who's our clinical director for mental health, autism and learning disabilities, to explore what we did in a bit more detail there.
Sure, thanks, Chair. Thank you, Terry. Yeah, I'm immensely proud of the fact that in Sheffield, we actually sort of made a choice to vaccinate our learning disability population ahead of the Joint Commissioning of Vaccination's national guidance, because we followed the evidence. We recognise that this cohort of people unfortunately die up to sort of 20 years sooner than the rest of the general population, often from respiratory illnesses. And we just made a decision, and we were able to implement that. And I think that was a really good example of trying sort of to tackle some of those substantial sort of inequalities. And I just want to thank our primary care teams and the clinical directors within the primary care networks that took that and ran with it, and were able to deliver on that.
Thank you, Steve. Leslie, were there any final comments you wish to add on the vaccination programme itself?
I think just the final thing from me, and I think Mark and Steve have covered it in terms of our work with local authority partners, and indeed our work with our colleagues in primary care and our networks. And I think one of the things I would just add to that is the regular communication engagement that we had with our primary care network clinical directors on a weekly basis, who truly understand their local communities and populations, who know them well, and the different things that will work in terms of engaging, hearing from those communities and encouraging them to uptake the vaccine. And I think that would be the thing that will have led to us having that reduced gap compared to comparative cities. But notwithstanding that, we've actually got loads more to do on that one as well.
Thank you, Leslie. Just before we move on to the next topic area, I'll just draw out some of the figures on vaccination in Sheffield. As of the 4th of October, which was the latest date we received our COVID vaccination figures, over 400,000 people in Sheffield had received their first dose of COVID-19 vaccination, and more than 373,000 had received their second dose of COVID vaccination. So overall, that's 773,000 injections that have been given by our primary care, our community pharmacy, and our mass vaccination centres. And that's all been achieved in 6 months. So that is a real achievement. And we know, particularly talking about those inequality groups, it's not always easy to get people through the door to have their vaccine. It represents a huge amount of work, a huge amount of enthusiasm on top of everything that people are already doing. And I would add into that as well, because it is still within the time frame of the last 12 months, just to add on to that, before we started with the COVID vaccination programme, primary care, local pharmacies in Sheffield had delivered their most successful and biggest flu vaccination campaign last winter. And again, I think it's worth recognising the significant amount of work that went into keeping people safe way back in winter 2020. Okay, I think the next question that we've had come through to us is, how has primary care coped and changed during the pandemic, and why are there pressures on primary care at this moment in time? So I think it would be really helpful to bring in some of our GP members on the governing body to give some reflections there. So who would like to start for me?
I'm happy to say something on that.
Perfect. Thank you, Ben.
So I guess the first thing to say is it's been a really hard year for patients and for people accessing services. COVID's come along and there's been a lot of changes, and it's been difficult sometimes to get appointments, and I think that has been very unsettling. And actually the changes themselves have also it's been a hard year. I think there's potentially a bit of a misconception that the difficult to get access at the moment is because of COVID, and people think, well, COVID's kind of on its way out, how come things are not back to normal? But actually what's been going on is that the demand and the struggle that you're seeing in general practice has been building for over a decade now, and it's been people living longer, more complexity, more medications. There's more things that we're doing in general practice, but the number of GPs has been going down. And so COVID's come along and just added to that. But as the pressures of COVID decrease, we're still left in a situation that's been building. And I think that there can sometimes be a bit of a confusion between both the problem and some of the solutions can be uncomfortable. So that one of the problems being it can be hard to get an appointment, and it might be all the appointments have gone at your surgery, and that is obviously very concerning. But there are things that we're doing to try and improve things that are also a real challenge for patients, and it is hard for us to be able to find ways of communicating what those things are. So one of them will be that there are to kind of compensate for the decreasing GPs. There are lots of new people coming in: pharmacists, paramedics, physician associates, nurse practitioners, and they are trained and supported within the GP team. But we need to have some way of being able to kind of support people to be seen by the most appropriate person. And so you might be wanting to see a GP when actually, if we know a bit about what the problem is, and if you feel happy to tell a receptionist, we can allocate people to the most appropriate person, and that means that when someone needs a GP, they are available. The other thing to say about that is that just because we started off with you seeing a physician associate or a physio doesn't mean that's the end of who you're going to see, because we work in a team often in rooms opposite each other. And if something comes up and the initial triage wasn't quite right, we talk to each other and we help each other out. But that is uncomfortable if you've got an idea of who you want to see and you don't know what the roles of other people are in the team. But we do need to be able to manage more appointments and help more people. We do need to have a bit of say over who patients see, and that is, recognize that is tough because it's a change. And then the other thing is around how we see people. And there's been a lot of talk about face-to-face and access to face-to-face. And again, I think with people thinking, well, with COVID perceived to be on the decrease, how come we've not gone back to normal? Before COVID came along, practices were moving to having these extra ways of seeing people, either through email or face-to-face or telephone. And it's a more efficient way of seeing more people safely, and it can be done very well. And when COVID came along, because of infection reasons, lots of other practices also joined in with doing it with this kind of often with a telephone triage approach. But it was something that we were doing already to try and manage demand. Excuse my voice going. But again, just because a telephone or an email might be how things start, it doesn't mean that's where it's going to end. Because if we speak to someone on the phone, they sound ill, we want to see you. We'll be bringing you in. And in fact, we've got, I'm certain about the evidence with this, that it's about 10% of people want to be seen. And nationally, it's 50% that are being seen face-to-face. Consistently, it's 10% when they're asked how they want to be seen, it's 10%. So we're seeing significantly more people who than actually want it. But again, it's uncomfortable because in the past, you could be seen face-to-face just because that was your preference. But if we're going to meet the demand of more people, offer more appointments with a stretched service, we do need to have the flexibility of different approaches. And so we do take into account people's preferences and particularly communication needs, or if you're ill, if you're kind of feeling quite unwell, we do take those things into account, but we can manage things safely and more efficiently if we have a variety of ways of seeing you and a variety of number of the people who might be able to help. So yeah, so it's uncomfortable if you can't get an appointment. It's also uncomfortable if you don't get to choose how you're seen. But if we can have some say over how you're seen and who you're seen by, we can help far more people. And that is that's kind of progressively more what's happening.
Okay, thank you, Ben. Do any of our other GPs want to add anything to that? I think you've given us a really good summary there, Ben. And again, I'm just going to draw out some figures. So in July this year, practices in Sheffield have seen unprecedented numbers of patients coming forward for routine and urgent appointments with their GPs. And we know that this has been increasing, as you've articulated, over many years, but over recent weeks, recent months, that has really begun to spike up. Practices in Sheffield in July saw 267,000 people in July alone. So that is a phenomenal number of people, and indeed that's nearly half of our city population had a GP appointment during that time. Now, not all of those were face-to-face, but as Ben has articulated, those were patient contacts that were delivered in a way that was safe and appropriate for our patients. Question for our GP colleagues. Ben, you've already articulated that sometimes you may be able to ring a GP surgery. There isn't necessarily an appointment available today at your own surgery. But maybe if I could potentially bring Marion Sloan in to answer this one. What provision do we have? What has the CCG done, and what do primary care organisations do to support people to be able to access a GP, even if it's not their own GP surgery?
Yeah, thank you. Well, the CCG's invested quite a lot of money in a very quick time with the primary care network and also Primary Care Sheffield. So there's two new funding streams. One's come from central government straight to the primary care networks, and the other one's come from the CCG in recognition of this demand. And there's a very overused word, unprecedented, but guess what? This is where we're at. So it is possible to see a GP, and it might not be your own GP, but it is possible to make that contact, and it's better than nothing. And once you're in the service, you will get the service you need. So if it turns out that sadly it's cancer that you've been worried about, that GP that you might see in Sheffield 13 or Sheffield 20 will still be able to get you into the hospital services quickly, same as your GP would do. So the service is a bit different from what it's been for many years, but it's still there. And if you are worried and you really feel that you need to see a GP, then just keep pressing until you make that contact. It doesn't really matter where. Everybody's joined up with the most fabulous IT systems that we've ever had, and the care is there to be had and to keep us all safe.
Thank you, Marion. So building on being able to see a GP in a hub elsewhere, what are the hours there? What sort of times of the day are people able to access GP hubs?
Yeah, I mean this is great. You can see a GP on a Sunday afternoon if you want. The hubs are open every night till 10 p.m. The hubs across the city for hot and cold. Hot is COVID related, till 10 p.m. and all the staff are there till 10 p.m. if people want to be seen, and that runs from 6 when the GP regular surgeries are winding down until 10 p.m. Monday to Friday. On a Saturday and a Sunday, the service opens at 10 a.m. and runs through till 6. And this is in addition to the walk-in centre and the GP collaborative, which have always been there. So there's a lot of additional routes into care, into primary care.
Thank you, Marion. I will now take us on to the final question topic that we've got here. And this is a question that lots of people are probably now asking their own GPs. But what is happening with the waiting lists and the backlog of activity in hospitals that's resulted due to COVID? So I just wonder whether I can bring in a member of our executive team to describe how the CCG is helping support bringing that waiting list down and support our hospitals to pick up those long waiting lists and get people the care that they need through the hospital referral. So Sandy, could I bring you in, please?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So I'm Sandy Buchan, Director of Commissioning Development. So we absolutely recognise that the impact the COVID has had on those people waiting for elective treatment. The CCG has been working with our acute trusts and with primary care to put in place things that will support the recovery of the elective activity, reduce the backlog of patients waiting for elective treatment and the time frame in which when they start that journey in terms of being seen, because what COVID has caused is really to extend those periods of time that they are waiting. But also we're looking at what we can put in place between both the acute hospitals and primary care, as well as helping the immense pressures that primary care is facing, as you've just heard, as a result of people waiting for elective treatment. So we're looking at putting some short-term solutions in place, and the programmes that are ongoing, that have been implemented to help and enable some of these solutions. Things looking at improved phlebotomy service across the city within primary care. We're also looking at the wider diagnostic services in the community diagnostic hubs and really trying to move some of that pressure and deal with some of those issues quicker. We're looking at enhancing the triage and specialist support across secondary and primary care, which includes further developing our CASES model. And CASES stands for Clinical Assessment Support and Education Service, and really is looking at bringing in the links between GPs and specialists in secondary care, reviewing referrals and making sure that patients are referred to the right place in the right time, and getting that education back into primary care between secondary and primary. We're also looking at the patient-initiated follow-ups, which is giving patients and their carers the flexibility to initiate their follow-up activity as and when needed. So when you want a follow-up appointment, you have the ability to arrange that rather than being given set times. So the programmes that are underway across Sheffield is really to look at supporting our elected transformation, and not just within the shorter term, but also longer term. And our approach in Sheffield is really to ensure that strong relationship and closer working across primary care and acute settings. And this will evidently, hopefully, result in better outcomes for patients, better experience of care, shorter waiting times, and making sure people receive the right healthcare in the right setting. So really that is the longer term aim and what we're doing in terms of those longer term programmes. So the other areas we're looking at is looking at the pathways to make more efficiencies within different specialties, and really getting that engagement across secondary and primary care to really make sure that it's as efficient as it needs to be. And we'll continue to monitor on the reduction in the waiting list, trying to support our secondary care colleagues as a system. So working with our partners across Sheffield, identifying where there is any issues and coming together to see if there's a system solution to helping them. So really focusing on reducing that backlog for our elective patients.
Thank you, Sandy. Is there anything else any members of our executive team would like to add to that? No, thank you. So I will bring our annual public meeting via video broadcast to an end. Hopefully, as we move into the future, certainly we'll be able to begin to have meetings of this type in public and be able to interact and engage with members of the public in a more direct fashion. Thank you, everyone, and we'll see you next time.